question is, and I'm coming to Jamal, you had the opportunity to work in this system, and you would have seen some of the frustrations yourself. How can anybody explain the sort of inaction, not as in when he puts a report before the president, the inaction as in at the macro level, when there are reports to police like this one, reported to the police? How can anyone explain some of these things? The reference to the president's backyard, so to speak. We understand that what has happened in the course of the week is rather misleading. It's mischievous. Because if you read the report, actually, he doesn't say that there was Galamsey in the president's garden. He speaks about Galamsey closest to his residence, which could impact the residence itself. And we are made to understand that the house that journalists were led to is not the house he's referring to. There is one house belonging to the president. That is not the house they went to. But that house is there. And the person Professor Frimpong Boateng actually mentions has been living in that house, not this one that journalists were taking to. He's been cultivating a lot of things. He actually, we are told, rears cattle, around the place as well. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Samson, and good morning to your cherished viewers and listeners, and good morning to my good people of Wali Wali, especially the youth. Samson, I didn't have the opportunity to make a preliminary...
Yes, please do. Please do. Forgive me.
And so, by way of preliminary comment, I would want to say that Galamsey is a historic policy failure is a gross understatement. Now, what I expect to see, therefore, is that I expect to see our president, on account of this embarrassing failure, to resign in terms of what his mandate is under Article 58 of the Constitution.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but are we not asking too much of the president? Are we expecting the president to act like a policeman, going round and whipping his officers to do their work? This is, the district chief executive for Elembele. The history shows that he has contained the situation in his place, even at the threat of his life. Should the president be there, sort of? I don't get that too.
Samson, I disagree with you if that's a position. I think it's a question, but if that was a statement, I'll disagree with you. The point is that to put yourself out there to run for the high office of president entails a lot, especially when it's someone who touts several years of public service, someone who has held sensitive positions like the office of the Attorney General, someone who has been foreign minister, and someone who, has been touted to be a human rights activist and advocate. And so, when we have failures of this scale and inconsistent with Article 58 and Article 69 of the Constitution, which requires, first of all, 58, that the president is charged with the main function of executing and maintaining the Constitution and executing the laws of Ghana, on the one hand. On the other hand, Article 69 tells us that if the conduct of the president amounts to what brings that high office to disrepute, or is inimical to our economic welfare or well-being, or even undermines our security, that should be a ground for the president to be removed from office.
This president, has elevated the Galamsey fight to the height no president has done before. Is that a fact?
It is not.
That is certainly a fact. Can you argue with that?
It's a purported let's call it a charade. Point is this. There were visible impacts of illegal mining. To start with, let's even zoom out. We've been in the weeds for so long. So we know that illegal mining is not new. It's been part of our national life. But this is how to think about it, that we have the historic phase of it and we have the existential phase of it. Now, the existential phase of it is what probably would have called for this, if you like, intensified crusade against illegal mining. But the big question to ask is this: how did we formulate the policy response to curb this menace? If we frame the question wrong, whether deliberately or out of ignorance, we are going to churn out policy responses that would be defective, as we have seen. Now, I mean, looking at the composition of the Interministerial Committee on Illegal Mining, looking at the background of the president, I would argue that it is not out of ignorance. I'm talking of the defective formulation of the policy. It is rather a deliberate thing. So
you are yet to show me and convince me that, and my viewers, that there has ever been a time when the fight has been this brutal, has been this, if you like, this strong. 10 ministries come together under an IMC with the military and police. Of course, there's history to show that at various points, presidents have codenamed particular operations to do this thing. But have we ever had it at this level?
Obviously, no, but Samson, that was not what we needed. That assemblage itself of experts or whatever, public policy leaders, would buttress my point that the defective formulation of the policy was deliberate. Why? And the earlier speaker was talking about metrics. He didn't use that word. But I don't see how you can formulate a policy without, first of all, especially when the policy response is geared toward, if you like, resolving a national crisis of the scale that we had at the time, we should get the framing of the issue right. Let us make a distinction between artisanal mining, small-scale mining, and large-scale mining. But in between the two, we had a new monster, which was mechanized mining disguised as small-scale mining.
Use of the sharp
We
parts.
should not think that, and even excavators, we would be dishonest with ourselves to think that, that was lost on everyone. The obvious fact was we really had a massive invasion of excavators in forest reserves. And so if we had framed that question properly, that is to say that we probably had small-scale mining 2.0 or mechanized small-scale mining, then our policy responses should be towards that. So I disagree with those who think that the community
Operation Halt phases 1 and 2 brought in 394 excavators. That's what they destroyed. Operation Halt phases 1 and 2 also led to the destruction of 37 excavators.
Something that brings us back to the point that I've been making all this while.
I'm talking about the scale of what has happened in terms of the fight, quote unquote.
Right, but something then we want to ask. The earlier speaker, had made the point. What are the metrics that we are going to use to measure the success or otherwise of these responses? What intermediate outcomes are we expecting, and what final outcomes are we expecting, and what metrics will point us in the direction of
because you had the rare opportunity to interface with this and to even provide advice. Give us an idea what you came to know to be the success. Phase 1, 400 personnel were deployed. Phase 2, 200 personnel were deployed. And all this time, the red zones were there. Don't mine in water bodies, forest reserves, no mining, complete red zone. Then you had the yellow zone. If you have to mine 100 meters radius away from the water bodies, you know, were these not, as it were, good signs, good policies to try and stop this thing?
So, Samson, I see two things taking place in your statement. On the one hand, we're talking about whether the state had the requisite capacity to resolve this problem. I would answer in the affirmative. It's an obvious yes. On the other hand, you're asking whether these securitized, the deployment of these security agencies has brought about outcomes that would say that these elements of the joint operation were successful. I would answer in the affirmative. But that is not what we need on such a serious policy matter. The metrics we need are not the number of arrests. The metrics we need are not the number of excavators that have been seized or shanfangs that have been destroyed or floating platforms.
Not enhancing the
metrics that
regime.
We need would be, has the turbidity of the water changed? The metrics that we need would be, have we been able to stop the degradation of our forests? The metrics we need will be, have we deterred all actors within the chain of this organized crime?
Yes, and that will be the effect of the cause. So the things you put in place, including enhancing the sanction regime, all of that, deploying 400, 200, taking excavator shanfines in excess 400, 300, and destroying them. The effect will be to improve the turbidity of the water. Is that not so?
Samson, you would agree with me that would amount to an unconstitutionality, and I've always held this view. Remember that we have constitutionally guaranteed and protected property rights. That the mere fact that we do not like a situation do not mean we should, react in a manner that is inconsistent with the principles of the rule of law. We should have pre-established laws which would, if you like, be supreme, and we should not be governed by the dictates of persons. So I don't just wake up and say that you are doing an illegality and so this is the response. No, what has the law said beforehand? The law was adequate even before this operation. And Article 706, the Minerals and Mining Act, and its amendment, Act 900 at the time, were deterrent enough. And they were very clear and they were consistent. We could have gone about this whole operation without violating constitutionally guaranteed rights. That is to say that the law required that once you make arrests in connection with suspected illegal mining activities, irrespective of ownership of equipment associated with the suspected illegal mining operations, you would seize the mining equipment. Upon conviction of anyone who was arrested for the illegal mining activities, the seized or impounded equipment would be confiscated to the state. Now, the Minister for Mining would then channel these to an appropriate institution. We needed those excavators for national developmental purposes, at least. Even in relation to mining, we needed them for reclamation.
You seize them, place them in the custody of the police. And then you have the Ekowuzis of this world, because of their connection to the party. And as the Professor Frimpong Boateng talks about, and they manage to get these excavators away. Okay, because they were not placed in the custody of police. They decided to assemble them by themselves. Is that what it was?
know something. What it was, at least when I was on the operation, was that you get,
That's before they started burning them. That's what I mean.
before they started. No, I honestly do
Samson,
not. I'm not familiar.
Before
with
they
that.
started burning them, they arrest them
Even after
and they
burning.
gathered them in numbers.
So maybe we should make this clear. When burning was done and people reacted to that, I mean, it became manifest that there was an unconstitutionality. So the standard operating procedure then became you immobilize these equipment in the field on the mining sites by detaching their control boards and their monitors, and then you make arrangements with the district assemblies to provide for low beds. I mean, the operation had its own low beds, but they were few. They were just about.
He wants to come in, and I know why. There was
yes.
one public issue he had to track.
Now there would be. He's an outlier. I mean, many of his colleagues have not.
The Minister of Defense had said,
in a way that
if I remember correctly, that this was war. So don't talk about your laws, applying your laws not to burn an excavator.
Well, he's the last person to talk about war. I earned a commission, and so I mean, I have the benefit of the law. I have the benefit of, military training, and I should have a more balanced and reliable view on what these things are. That wasn't war, and that's part of the problem. When we define crises like that as war, then we securitize them. And that is not the way to go. We need a proper political, economic analysis of these issues. We need to ask the very basic questions. The what, the who, the whys, and the hows.
Let's talk about the house, from where you sit.
The hows as in how to respond to this problem?
Yes. Effectively. Of course, we are responding
Effectively, my view has been that a year into Operation Vanguard, we didn't need boots in the field. I mean, a cost-benefit analysis didn't justify that. A cost-effectiveness analysis didn't justify that. What we needed to do, after having several thousands of arrests and after impounding several hundreds of excavators, what we needed to do was to consolidate that effort. We needed to emphasize on the prosecutions. The law was deterrent enough at the time. We didn't even need to tinker with the law beyond what we had at the time Operation Vanguard existed. Point is that if you imagine the cost of an excavator, and an excavator is confiscated to the state because it is merely associated with an illegal mining venture, that's going to be enough disincentive to do away with the financiers of illegal mining at that scale, the mechanized illegal mining. And so we needed to enhance and emphasize on the prosecution. But as Mr. Bonzo mentioned, there were lapses within the criminal justice system at the time. The courts, the number of judges who sat in the courts, the backgrounds of even those judges, and then even if we had effective prosecutions was a very significant problem.
Tell us about that, because that's the area you are working in, the legal sort of the department and advice.
Right.
There's a time even the president had cause to say that we don't trust the judges, therefore we are taking away from the judges the power to determine the sanction. That's why we enhanced the law and then said minimum you go to jail for 5 years, maximum 15 or how many years, and so on. What was your problem? What is your problem about the system?
But, that undermines judicial independence. Did the president really say we couldn't?
We make laws. We make laws and fetter the discretion of judges. Every time, that's what it is. Where there is no minimum or maximum. So a judge is allowed to determine what punishment. That's what they did. So they enhanced the law and then fettered the discretion of the judge. You are supposed to give a punishment within this and that. If it is amount of money to take, this and that. So the judge can wriggle around it.
That's very unfair to the judiciary. And the point is, we are talking about sentencing, but you and I know that we would have to go from arrests, prosecutions, conviction, then sentences would follow. How many people were convicted is the question. That metric was really very poor. We had several thousands of people arrested. We had a paucity of convictions. Not because, I'm not saying once you are brought before a judge, the judge should convict you, but there was overwhelming evidence that if the evidence was properly put before the judges, if proper charges were, if you like, filed in respect of these offenses, the judges would convict. And the minimum, even the minimum sentences were deterrent enough. So even if you say judges had discretion, I think that the legal order at the time.
So for you, this is part of the how. And you actually, as we understand, some of us have been privileged to see certain things that you had advised about how to make it effective. What was the problem that you wanted to make effective, and where are we with it now? Because we are still in the fight.
So you would have prosecutors who mainly would be inspectors and chief inspectors. And much as these people have familiarity with the criminal procedure, they have obvious limitations in respect of the substantive criminal law. Now, even though Operation Vanguard had police elements, crime officers, and then the military component, and would go into the field and arrest these people, put together the evidence, have, recordings, video recordings and photographs of all these activities, Operation Vanguard couldn't lead in the prosecutions. Although Operation Vanguard had trained lawyers who were capable and were willing and available to prosecute these matters, of which they had first knowledge, and within whose control they had the evidence. And so the basic thing is, it's the Attorney General and the lawyers of that department who would prosecute in the name of the Republic. And so even if you are a lawyer in the military, you have no audience in court in that regard. However, you find a helpless inspector who is charged with this very important function of prosecuting these matters.
Okay. So your recommendation is
so the recommendation was that the Attorney General under Section 56 of Act 30 can in writing authorize or permit any lawyer to prosecute any offense.
And that would be better than the police prosecution of these offenses.
Indeed. And if that had been done and we had consolidated the effort of the arrest, the seizures and all that within a matter of 3 months, at most 6 months, the deterrence that would flow from such effective prosecutions would do away or would have done away.
Okay, that should still be done.
Yes,
from
that
where
should
you
still
sit.
be done, yes.
Okay.